Welcome to the Book Faire podcast. I'm Anthony, and this week we have an interview with author Shelby Mahurin. The latest Hunger Games entry hits number 3 overall bestseller. South Carolina pauses a vote on statewide book bans, and Sarasota County District to release books they claim are not banned but deselected. Let's begin with an interview with author Shelby Mahurin about her latest book, The Shadow Bride, the final book from the Serpent and Dove universe. Shelby, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing really good. To start off the interview, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the newest book that's coming out that we'll be discussing today?
Right. So I am Shelby Mahurin. I'm the author of the Serpent and Dove trilogy and the Scarlet Veil duology. The book that we're talking about today is The Shadow Bride, which is the sequel to the Scarlet Veil, and it's also the conclusion to the duology. It's the last book set in the Serpent and Dove universe, and it follows our main character, Sally, as she navigates her transformation into a vampire. But, she isn't the only undead roaming around. Her dearly departed sister, Philippa, has returned as a shadow of her former self, and revenants are rising from the grave, intent on revenge, because Sally has broken the fragile balance between life and death. She's torn a hole in the veil and awakened an even darker force, and he is coming for Sally, ready to claim her as his bride. Hence the title, The Shadow Bride. It all fits neatly back into that title.
Right, and not just with the Scarlet Veil and now The Shadow Bride, but the Serpent and Dove series is all a part of one big Gothic fantasy universe. Dark fantasy and fantasy in general has been a pretty big genre in the last few years. I know that Serpent and Dove came out back in 2019, more at the beginning of this latest trend, but as you've been writing this series, are there any tropes that you tried to avoid while writing in this kind of oversaturation of fantasy market?
It's really interesting. I don't think I've ever been asked which tropes I've tried to avoid. Usually it's which tropes did you include? So I don't think that there was anything that I was just actively trying to avoid trope-wise. I love a trope. I know that might be like a hot take, but I love a trope because I love the kind of like agreement that happens between author and reader when you utilize tropes. I love having established tropes so that we can subvert them, and have fun with them and deconstruct them, which I tried to do with Sally's archetype from the original trilogy, where she was kind of a mean girl. So I guess that would be one that I've tried to avoid, is the mean girl trope. She does start out that way, but I tried to deconstruct that trope from Serpent and Dove to Gods and Monsters, which is the last book in the original trilogy. Sally, when we meet her, she is Reed's ex-girlfriend, essentially, his childhood love, who they have broken up after the death of her sister. And then Reed goes on to meet Lou, who is the main character of that original trilogy, and he is forced into marriage with her. He falls in love with her, all of these things. The first time that we see Sally on the page is her reunion with Reed after he's married someone else. And so she does not come across in her best light. She's very upset. She's very angry. And because of that, she's been a very polarizing character for readers, because she sounded like a mean girl. Obviously, like I said, I tried to stretch her throughout Blood and Honey and Gods and Monsters. I tried to give the reader more information about her and her feelings and what she's been going through and all of these things to, like I said, subvert that mean girl trope. And then I continued to do that in The Scarlet Veil and The Shadow Bride. I've been really privileged because I've had 5 books to do that with her character. She's been in all 5 books, so I've had a lot of time to develop her, which has been really satisfying as an author.
You mentioned that she was polarizing among readers. Subverting the character trope of the mean girl and also kind of giving more context to her, was that a part of subverting the mean girl trope, or were you kind of trying to bring more clarity to the character to fans who didn't quite understand where she was coming from?
I think both. In subverting it, I don't know. Is there such a thing as a quote unquote mean girl, like the stereotype that we're given? I feel like it's a very surface level analysis of a woman. Yes, there are women who are mean or who behave in an unkind way. But in Sally's case, there was a lot more going on behind the curtain with Sally when she had that interaction with Reed, where she disliked Lou so much. Like I said, her sister had just died. Reed was her great love. They broke up so that he could go on to defeat witches, because he was a huntsman. He hunts the occult. And here he is married to a witch. She didn't know that Lou was a witch at the time. So there is an arc of Sally's character because she did behave in a very unkind way where she has to go back and look at that behavior and acknowledge it, even though I like to say there's always a reason, there's never an excuse. So I did want to give more clarity to her character, but she also did need to examine her behavior and atone for it. Really, her and Lou develop a friendship actually over the course of the 3 books, which was very fulfilling to write. But they do have several conversations about that first encounter where Saley calls her a name, and it's not a very nice name, and they have to work through that.
And in her journey, you mentioned that Saley becomes a vampire. What is it like writing a Gothic fantasy world where there is typically a very clear delineation between the good aligned characters and races and the evil aligned characters and races, and kind of blurring that by merging a character together to become one of these more evil aligned perceived characters?
Right. It was very difficult for Saley in particular because, the vampires that we meet in the Scarlet Veil are evil aligned. They are not great. There are obviously exceptions to every rule, but this is a struggle that she has to sort of navigate in the Shadow Bride, because Saley she was she was the kingdom's first huntswoman in the Scarlet Veil. She swore to do good. It was her vow. And then she suddenly has found herself through kind of like in this mess where suddenly she is the evil aligned character, and she has to reconcile her beliefs about what's good and what's evil. Can she still be good even though she craves blood, even though she has these kind of violent urges now? What does that mean for her? I also thought that it was very interesting to have vampires, these evil aligned characters, with Saley, because Saley was a devout character in the original books. And so my vampires, they can't speak the word, they can't speak God's name, they can't step on hallowed ground. And these are things that Saley has to reconcile now that she is one of them. What is going on? Why can't I do these things? Why can't I say these things? Am I evil? It was an interesting journey for her. And it also kind of played into her relationship with the love interest, who is a vampire, Mihal. They have many conversations about what it means to be good, what it means to be evil. Are we still the same as vampires as we were as humans, in our hearts?
And looking at a character who has recently transformed, was there a lot of fun in kind of stretching the way that you write a character, especially when you talk about having cravings for blood and dark urges? These intrusive thoughts, you as a writer have a very unique opportunity to describe intrusive thoughts. Is that something that you played with in these books?
Absolutely. It was one of my favorite parts, actually. There's a scene, without getting too spoilery, in The Shadow Bride where Saley she's been fighting these intrusive thoughts, and then she just kind of snaps. And it was my favorite part to write. But yes, it was fun with Saley to play with her as a vampire, because as a human, her strength was not strength the way that we think of it in a traditional way. She was not physically strong. She was not strong in kind of a masculine sense where she could wield a sword and march into battle like Louise LeBlanc was, who is the main character in Serpent and Dove. Saley's strength came from her emotions, her intuition, all of these sort of quote unquote softer attributes that she has that sometimes aren't celebrated. And so here we are suddenly where she does have that physical strength. She is the strongest person in the room other than, the other vampires. And so it was interesting to get her reaction to that, because it's just not a tool that she had in her toolbox before. And she doesn't know how to use it. She doesn't know how to wield it because she's never been that person.
You mentioned that she was the strongest person in the room other than the other vampires. Is that something that carries on from her previous life, being seen as kind of this fragile little pretty piece of porcelain doll, as it was written in Scarlet Veil, which I loved. I loved her going back to that line. Being weaker than the other vampires, was that something that she considered throughout her journey?
She definitely notices it. And it's interesting because it's like this newfound strength for her, but it's kind of a return to the status quo, because physically she was always weaker than her friends, her human friends, her witchy friends, her magical friends. And now she's on this island of vampires as a vampire, but she's still, a newborn. So it's not like she could just go up to Mihal and beat him up. She can't do that. She doesn't know how, and she doesn't actually have the physical strength to do it. So it was an interesting return to the status quo.
And not just a return to status quo. Do you think that that kind of humanizes the vampires to show that they still have this hierarchy, this social structure of who is quote unquote the strongest? There's people on top, there's people on bottom. Do you think that humanizes them?
I think that it could, absolutely. It gives them a weakness because there is still that hierarchy of strength. And strength is very important to the vampires. Physical strength is very important to the vampires. It's kind of how they decide who to follow, who's in charge, who gets to make the rules. And that actually is a great question because that becomes a point of contention in the Shadow Bride is who we're following and why do we have to follow you? Why are you in charge? Which is why the vampires that we saw in the Scarlet Veil are they're violent, they're vicious because it's kind of their social structure, the strongest rules.
Anytime that you have a setting or writing of characters that have a hierarchy based on strength and an importance of power, it does kind of beg the question and leads into the talk of the role of masculinity, misogyny, patriarchy. Is that something that you considered when writing Saley into this world?
Absolutely it is. And I can't get too spoilery, but it's something that I considered when writing another character in the Shadow Bride as well, is what this character looks like in this kind of patriarchal society where strength is everything. And it begged the question, is strength everything? I know the vampires certainly consider it to be, but are they right? Or are they wrong? Are there other types of strength that maybe trump the physical strength of the vampires? And I get to explore that in the Shadow Bride as well.
And so to kind of back away from the Shadow Bride and to look at the series as a whole, Serpent and Dove kind of broke out into the scene and the whole trilogy, it really did take off and it was big on TikTok. And now with the Scarlet Veil, the Shadow Bride, you're closing out not just a duology and Saley's story, you're kind of capping this entire world, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. It's a bittersweet feeling. I did say with Gods and Monsters that I was done. Gods and Monsters is the last book of the original trilogy, and when I finished writing it, I was like, I'm done in the world. I'm done with this series. I want to move on to something else. And then, I ate my words because I was very upset at the actual thought of letting them go the day before publication, and that's why I developed the Shadow Bride and Saley's storyline and all these things. But I think the time has come to say goodbye. I hope that I did the characters justice in the arcs that I've given them and the conclusion of those arcs. The other characters from Serpent and Dove, Blood and Honey, Gods and Monsters, they are in the Shadow Bride and the Scarlet Veil, the main cast. If there were any loose threads, I tried to wrap those up. There's an epilogue at the end of the Shadow Bride with all of the characters that are still here. And I do try to really to give them like a satisfying conclusion to the whole, all 5 books, the whole world.
So you're done. You've said this before, but here we are.
Here we are. I know. I think it's true this time.
What's coming next from Shelby Mahurin?
Currently, I'm trying to sell an adult book. So Serpent and Dove, The Scarlet Veil are all shelved as young adult. So I'm working on pages right now for an adult proposal, which I can't say too much about because it hasn't sold, obviously, but I'm very excited about it. If you liked my previous books, I think that you'll like my adult project. It's still very magical. It's still very romantic. It's still a Shelby Mahurin book. And I really hope that I get to talk more about it someday, soon.
And just to clarify, that's adult as in the target audience.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I know that I have to clarify
shelved.
that a lot.
Right. No, yes. So it'll be shelved in adult, which is a
yes.
first for me.
Yes. And to close out the interview, I ask this question to all authors, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Shelby, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as an author?
This is a good question. That's a hard question, a very existential question. I see myself as a character writer, first and foremost, and I would love for readers to view my work and those characters in my work and to feel seen. I know that's a very common answer, but for anyone who has felt like Saley, like that they don't quite belong, that their strengths are not valued, that they have to prove their worth by what they do instead of who they are, I hope that those people can read my characters and know that that's not the case and that they do belong. They belong in my books. They belong in the real world. There is space for them at the table and they do have value.
Thank you. That was an interview with Shelby Mahurin. Her latest book, The Shadow Bride, is available now. Next, a look at recent releases. But first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, you can support the show in a number of ways. First, you can rate, like, or review the podcast on whichever platform you are currently listening. You can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair, where you can find episodes posted early, as well as resources and links to news articles used in the show. Following on Patreon is completely free. Content is not locked behind a paid subscription. Lastly, the best way to help the podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Let's take a look at some new releases, beginning with Carousel Summer by Kathleen Gros. When her best friend heads to summer camp, 12-year-old Lucy is left to her own devices in a small town called Milford. As the season progresses, she navigates a budding romance with confident bisexual visitor Anais, and comes to understand more about who she is and who she wants to be. Lucy's acts of self-assertion become points of tension in her relationship with her single father, who is facing his own alienation by the community. Digital illustrations feature clean line work and a warm palette that evokes a nostalgic summer atmosphere. Colors shift to more muted tones during Lucy's private moments of self-reflection. Expressive character design and clever visual metaphors, such as Milford's carousel restoration symbolizing renewal, enhance the story's emotional resonance and quiet, intimate moments, as when Lucy bikes with Anais or reads on the beach, balance the narrative's weightier themes with heartfelt authenticity. By blending queer joy with thoughtful ruminations on change and tradition, and interweaving classic coming-of-age angst with broader social themes, author Gros celebrates self-discovery and resilience, making for a richly textured graphic novel. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next up, Midnight Motorbike by Maureen, Shay, Tajsar, illustrated by Ishita, Jain. On a night too hot to sleep, a child narrator and their ama ride on a motorcycle through villages amid lush greenery and between silent temples toward the Bay of Bengal. In the belly of the Indian moon, they pass through a market where the child reports myriad perceptions. Quote, steaming silver-cupped chai, spicy potato-stuffed masala dosas, and the warm hay of an elephant's bed. Finally, the moon high in the sky, the narrator falls asleep in Ama's arms. Extended first-person lines from Shay Tajsar, making her debut, lean into lyricism over precision. Thickly rendered mixed-media illustrations from Jain, meanwhile, strikingly capture the dreamlike state of the late-night ride. Includes an author's note, which discusses the creator's visits to South India, and an illustrator's note. This book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Next up, Boys with Sharp Teeth by Jenni Howell. High school senior Maureen James is certain that her older cousin Sam Bulvain's drowning death was not an accident. Using a forged application and a fake tuition check, she assumes a new identity as Jamie Vane and transfers into elite Huntsworth Preparatory Academy, where Sam worked as a security guard. She has 3 suspects, all students: haughty, brainy Adrian Hargraves, wealthy orphaned scoundrel Henry Wu, and insecure, easy-to-please Baz Hallward, the headmistress's daughter. As Maureen races to uncover the perpetrator before her con is discovered, she becomes embroiled in her suspect's dangerous, thrill-seeking ways. Supernatural happenings, having to communicate with who she assumes is one of the suspects through anonymous marginalia notes, and growing attachments to both Adrian and Henry further complicate her investigations. Debut author Howell deftly conveys grief in this complex and morose offering, highlighting through the characters' messy interactions, including Maureen's vengeance-fueled scheming and Adrian's guilt over a past transgression. The ways in which loss can impact one's emotions and decision-making. This book is recommended for ages 14 and up. And lastly, Survive This Safari by Natalie D. Richards. Middle schooler Lucy Spagnola can't stop thinking about the stupid panic attack that prevented her successful completion of the trial to become an ambassador for Ohio's Wildlands Safari Park Rescue Sanctuary. When she's invited to participate in the Wildlands Safari Escape Challenge, she knows she can't do it, as it would mean competing against all the current ambassadors who witnessed her, quote, complete and total meltdown, end quote. But her older sister Alex, a college student and Wildlands intern, convinces animal expert Lucy to accept the invite. Neighbor Gemma joins the event along with Harrison, who has ADHD, and aspiring horticulturist Trey. Together, the ragtag team works to solve the competition's puzzles, and then it becomes clear that something is sabotaging their excursion. Though secondary characters are somewhat thinly developed, Lucy's feelings and personality jump off the page as she navigates wildlife challenges and interpersonal dilemmas, and discovers new ways to manage her anxiety. Richards invites readers to join in on the puzzle-solving action via amusing footnotes and cleverly constructed riddles and games in this interactive escape room-like adventure. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Now let's look at some recent news, beginning with the latest Hunger Games entry by Suzanne Collins. Sunrise on the Reaping launched this past week and hit bestsellers lists with 1.2 million copies across all formats in the US alone. Sunrise on the Reaping even broke past the children's and YA lists to make number 3 bestseller overall for its first week of release. Ellie Berger, president of Scholastic Trade, said that sales have exceeded all expectations, doubling the domestic sales of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and 3 times the copies of Mockingjay in their respective first weeks. After the amazing success of Sunrise on the Reaping, it is unsurprising that a feature film adaptation is already in the works, with a tentative release window of November 2026. Next, a Florida school district is arguing in favor of book bans. In a previous episode of the Book Faire podcast, we highlighted a story where Florida's Department of Education argued that book bans were a liberal hoax, and it seems that Sarasota County is following their example, claiming that books are not being banned, only deselected from library catalogs. Staff members have also announced they will release a list of challenged books in compliance with new state laws about transparency for book selections and removals. Assistant Superintendent Rachel O'D said, quote, "We don't ban books. We deselect them based on categories," end quote. A book may stay in district circulation at a higher grade level due to maturity content, while other books are traded out for more appropriate content. However, the district argues that trading a book does not count as a book ban. And closing on more positive news, South Carolina postpones vote on banning 10 books statewide. South Carolina's State Department of Education held a meeting on April 1st with 10 books on the table for complete removal statewide. However, after discussion, a motion to table the decisions for another month was made. The 10 books being considered for removal are Collateral by Ellen Hopkins, Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas, Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Hopeless by Colleen Hoover, Identical by Ellen Hopkins, Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, Living Dead Girl by Elizabeth Scott, Lucky by Alice Sebold, and Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. These books are up for removal thanks to Regulation 43-170, stating that materials deemed to have descriptions of sexual content must be removed from schools. As to be expected, the phrasing of the rule is intentionally vague, leading to titles to be removed that are arguably appropriate for specific age ranges. South Carolina Department of Education used taxpayer money to hire a lawyer to lobby in support of the book banning bill, and set up the Instructional Materials Review Committee, the IMRC. The IMRC reviews complaints and elects whether or not to advance those complaints to the state DOE for final decision. The 10 titles were recommended by the The 10 titles were recommended by the IMRC and slated for a vote by the State Department of Education Board. Thankfully, there were board members that opposed the book bans. One member, Dr. O'Shield, mentioned how every statewide book ban, as well as the 10 titles up for a vote at that meeting, were all coming from a single county. This is highlighting how book bans are coming from small groups that are asserting power over the entire state through lobbying and controversial statements about pornography in schools. The 10 books from this week's meeting were all challenged by a single person, Elizabeth Zalay, who is a professional book challenger. She is behind challenges of nearly 100 other titles, most of which returned to shelves. Book Riot puts it best on their article, stating, quote, "One parent has had outsized power to have books banned across an entire state." Arguments from anti-censorship advocates led to the South Carolina Department of Education to thankfully postpone their vote. However, this does not mean that the book bans will not eventually go into effect. I will make sure to report on this as it develops. And this will conclude another episode of the Book Faire podcast. You can learn more about these stories shared this week at patreon.com/thebookfair. You can follow for free to access these resources, as well as follow on Blue Sky at BookFairPod. Thank you very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.